I've just extended the garden and weeded it from all the couch grass. Quite a job, and I recommend you section it off with a shovel and then pull the couch grass out like spaghetti. And hey, guess what? It's time for planting, one of my favorite things in the garden. So, what are we planting today? I've got Angelica because it's a biannual and I'm still learning how to grow it fast. And I have seedlings, but I want some to eat, so I brought it. Native mint, horseradish, first time growing it, and a punnet of unusual basils. So we'll just start with the basics. This is how you take a plant out of a pot, put your hands around the base with the plant poking through your fingers, turn it upside down, give it a bit of a squeeze, a bit of a tap. As you can see, the roots have bound it in, so I'm gonna squeeze and pull, and it's pretty root bound, so break all that up. And I like to dig with my hands because it doesn't cut through all the soil life. And bury it at the same level it was in the pot. I like to make a ring around the plant with a raised ridge to hold water for when it rains, and if I water, the water will gather around the plant and soak in directly to the plant and not run off, taking the soil with it. Bada boom, bada bing, it's done. So that's how you plant a plant. And we'll go this native mint, a very big pot. The roots look nice, not root bound or anything. Now where should we put this one? Let's put it here. The one good thing about digging up couch grass is you get to really see what's in your soil and sieve through it. And you can really learn a lot by clearing the couch grass. Now, I've shown many ways how to improve soil and get your soil ready without digging at all. But at this time of year, in spring, a lot of those methods I recommended are too harsh for plants to be directly sown into. You need those few months for everything to break down, for the soil life to amp up. So that's what's happening in the rest of the garden. But this is a fresh patch, and like I've mentioned, digging up a fresh patch, you can usually get away with the nutrients that is built up in the soil, and that can be deceiving, and you would think that your soil was fine, but I've seen time and time again people do that, and myself, and then the second year everything grows really poorly because the permanent systems, the permaculture systems of soil fertility and soil building weren't in place, and what was there gets used up in that first year. So here's another one. Now I'll infiltrate this new soil with rocket and weed-like vegetables and greens that I like. I'll let them grow. That will create the first layer of living mulch, and I'll slowly start adding mulch and covering it and implementing the forest fertility systems. Another thing to remember when working with seedlings is to handle them, if you have to, by the leaf, not by the stem, because it can be easily bruised, as so does the leaf. but the plant can easily recover from a bruised leaf, where a seedling can really suffer with the bruised stem and sometimes not recover. So if you have to handle the body of the seedling, handle it by the leaf, not by the stem. What else is good to know? We'll have to dig up another... Oh no, we'll put this here. Now the reason I'm putting all this Angelica here is because it's slightly shady and it appreciates, whoa, that tree root. It appreciates the shade. So I'm planting it in this area, even though I like to spread my plants out. I learnt with Angelica. And I just want to talk about Angelica because it's one of my favorite vegetables. It's one of the first plants one of the first vegetables I grew in the garden when I was around 17. And it's an amazing medicine and an amazing vegetable. It has the intense flavor of celery, but you only need maybe this much per person, and it feels like, it tastes like you've put a whole big bunch of celery in the meal, and the health benefits are amazing. So it's my celery replacement because I don't like dealing with celery. I don't like the stringiness. I don't like growing it, though I'm going to try some new varieties this year. And so not only are the health benefits through the roof, but you can put it in anything for that celery flavor. It smells amazing, and the roots make an amazing medicinal tea. Dong Quai, which is drunk a lot in China. Yep, just truly one of my favorite plants in the garden. I just think it's so beautiful. I've got one that's going to flower, and I was hoping for this to be the one that I would harvest from and dehydrate, but it's going to flower, so that means its life cycle is almost over. I barely got anything. I'm really learning about Angelica still, even though I've grown it a lot. It's one of my favorite vegetables. It likes to grow by creek beds in the wild, and there's some lookalikes. It's in the parsley family. Don't confuse it with poison hemlock in the wild. Research if you look for this in the wild. Related to celery, parsnips, carrots, it has that flavor that they all have, and it really leans more on the celery side of things. I'm going to pot these seedlings up before I put them in the garden because they're so young and tender. The snails and slugs will just have a field day. And I'm not sure, I definitely want this purple spotty one in the garden, but I'm not sure exactly what the others do or what the others are because the label was dodgy. And who knows, I might sell a few on. So I'm going to do this with one hand, so it's going to be tricky. No, I'll get the stand. Okay, so when you're working with real little tender babies like this, they're still very resilient. Oh, and I just dropped half. And luckily they fell the right way. Now, how you deal with this, don't plant the whole thing. Separate it. If you buy a punnet and you see all these little babies, separate each one of them and plant them at the recommended distance apart. It's tempting to plant the whole thing, but that's the wrong thing to do. Break it up into sections by the leaf. Gently peel the babies away. Put them aside. After that's all done, just make a little hole with your finger so the roots go all the way down the hole easily. Just gently get it in there and then gently fold the soil back on top. And that's how you pot these little seedlings. So just peel them away one by one. Separate the soil with your hand like an envelope. Put the seedling in the envelope so it's just dangling there with its roots free. Fold the soil back over the roots. This isn't a stressful thing at all. You can do this so fast and so easy. Like, you know, grab two at once, separate them, hole, in, done, hole, in, done. This is a weird variety, I can tell by the thick stem. In you go, fold the envelope, send it to the garden. And like I said, seedlings this young and tender are so resilient. If you flailed an older basil's roots around like this, it would never recover, but seedlings are resilient, so it's more the stem you have to be careful of, not so much the whole plant itself. Grab it by the leaf, pull it off, open the soil. And the reason I'm reiterating this is because I've seen a lot of people confused, especially, well, new gardeners. I've seen them confused when they're presented with a punnet of seedlings. Well, I have to wash my hands. Okay, so they're all in. And water them straight away. So a nice water. And you always plant tender seedlings that you've pulled apart, you know, where their roots have been highly disturbed. You always plant them in the shade on a grey day or in the late afternoon, so they've got the whole cool night to recover. And if they've had a lot of trauma during the move, keep them in the shade for a couple days till they start looking strong. If they flop over in the sun the next day, put them in the shade. I usually try 3 days to a week, and they should be fine. So here we are again, back at the Angelica native mint and horseradish, and I'm just going to sprinkle my Nan's rocket seeds, and they are going to compete with the first lot of weeds that come up, and I will have to be pulling weeds from this bare soil. And as the rocket fades, I'll chop it down as a chop and drop, and I'll start piling on leaf matter, organic matter, and when the soil is good enough, wood chips and chopped up leaves. And water it in. Now, because the soil is roughed up and the water's hitting it and leveling it, moving it all around, that will actually bury the majority of the rocket seeds enough. Doesn't that look pretty? And I forgot to mention, how do you like my new fire bath? It's not completely set up yet. I'll have to build a fire underneath, and then I can bathe under the moon and stars and recycle my bath water back onto the grass and the trees. Look at all the babies I have to plant out. So I will just be planting, and my baby finger pumpkins are in for it now. I want to show you guys a bit of a trick when working with squash or pumpkin. Now, I think these are technically a squash. They sort of store, and they're the size of a pumpkin. They taste more like a zucchini. So sometimes I call them finger pumpkins, finger squashes, but I should find out. Now, if you've watched previous episodes, you'll know that this patch here, this was a layer of weeds covered with a thick layer of leaf matter, then covered with ash, wood ash from the fire, then covered with manure. As you can see, some still not completely covered there. Then covered with wood chips and chopped up leaves, and then covered with coffee grinds. Now, this hasn't decomposed enough to really plant much into, but pumpkins can really handle it. You might have seen pumpkins growing out of people's rotting compost. And this is just perfect for pumpkins. I've tested out so many, I've really pushed pumpkins to the limit, and they can just handle all this acidity. They soak up all that nitrogen. They love it, but we can't plant the baby seedlings with their bare roots straight into fresh, new, acidic soil. But once they're established and start to branch out with their roots, they'll adapt and it'll be okay. So how do we get around this? So I have this box of just boring, plain old soil from digging up some peonies at a friend's the other day. And instead of just throwing this out, I'm gonna dig little pits the size of small pots into this patch and then fill it with this plain soil and then plant the seedlings into that. So because we've got wood chips on top, we definitely have to scrape them back. And it's a thick layer. So scrape it back we go. Make the shape of a small pot. So I've hit the manure and leaves here. Let's get the seedlings. You can just do this with your fingers or with a butter knife. Dig in there, get around the base of the plant, pull it out nice. Now, fill this little pot with soil that the seedling will handle very nicely as it regains strength after the transplanting. So in you go. Nice soil. Big truck just went past. Nice soil. And cover it back up a little bit. We want to make a nice bowl shape for the future because this plant's going to get big and we want to be able to pour a lot of water and for the water to drain directly down to the plant's roots if we water it at all. We'll see how we go this year. So she's in. Nice little pot in this ridiculously nutrient mulch layer. Lasagnaed with all different forms of nutrients. Beautiful. Oh, look how cute they all are. I don't know what I'm going to do with all of these. So, just dig away the mulch to make the pot. And look, we've hit manure. We don't want to bury any of these wood chips because it kind of has an adverse, it does have an adverse reaction. We've reached the leaves and manure. Now, this looks like a strong seedling. Just get your fingers around and underneath. Pull it up, keeping all the roots intact. Whoops, I should have put some soil first. Here we go. The one-handed gardening show. Oh, some nice basic soil. What, there's a root in there. And now a little dip so the plant holds itself. It's much easier to do with two hands, but for the sake of showing you exactly what I'm doing, because everyone interprets things a different way unless they can see exactly what's happening. Just go around the plant. As the soil builds, it will hold the plant up nicely. Make a nice... when this gets watered, all the soil's going to run down, fill all the gaps. Gently push the soil down, start making the bowl shape. And that's just lovely. And that bowl shape with exposed bare soil, you can put banana skins around that, you can put compost around that to give the plant even more of a boost. But I would watch out when the plant gets older with, banana skins and things rotting vegetable waste because it can go moldy and the mold can spread to the leaves of the plant. So as the plant gets older, I tend to keep it really clean around the base of pumpkins, squash and cucumbers. And all the finger squash are in, and again with the rocket seeds, I just sort of ball my hand and let them fall through the cracks in my fingers like a salt and pepper shaker. And then of course water it in. Always water them in. The only exception to the watering plants in after moving them rule is with succulents, because the roots of succulents are much like their body, holding an extra amount of nutrients and water. And if there's root damage and you water the succulent, all that nutrients and water that's supposed to be stored in the root leaks out, and it can take longer for the succulent to recover. So you should leave a succulent for about 3 days before you water it in. But if you're doing it from a cutting, like most people do succulents, water it straight away. Let's get that last one out there. And all this rocket, if it gets in the way, I'll just pull it out like a weed, because a weed would have grown in its place anyway. And if I get a few baby leaves off it in the beginning, that's just awesome. And I'm going to use coriander in much the same way in a different area of my garden, not with the pumpkins because it grows taller than pumpkins, and I don't want the coriander, my weed replacement, to shade any of my actual chosen plants. So, a little trick with coriander seeds: each one of these isn't the seed, that's the pod, and there's tiny seeds. And these tiny seeds are great to use as weed replacements, because you just throw them around and they work their own way into the soil and come up when they want to, just like a weed does. So you put it on a flat surface like a brick with catchment underneath, and you use another brick, and you don't push down. You just let the natural weight of the brick crack open the seeds, and you roll them back and forth. Crack open the seed pods, sorry. Just roll it back and forth, and that'll split all those pods. And then when you throw this over the garden, you'll get them growing more evenly instead of 20 coriander plants growing out of a pinpoint, and they'll all choke each other and struggle. So, pull them onto the plate, and they're in my hand. And things are a bit taller around this area of the garden, so I'll just, again like a salt and pepper shaker, let them just spill from the cracks in my fingers. That's why I won't make a video on every individual seed that I grow, because there are so many little tips and tricks, and it's best you just research for yourself, because if I try and make a video, it'll probably be 24 hours long. But I'm going to put some bush beans in, the new Angelica native mint and horseradish patch. I'm going to pop them around the Angelica because the Angelica will appreciate the shade. Now I like to put beans in with a spoon. So a lot of gardening tools I like are actually kitchen utensils. So I just make a little hole, pop the seed in, cover it up, and there you go. So bush beans are a nice thing to plant in between other plants, and they give you that biodiversity, especially if there's an area like this where it's a shady, soggy patch, perfect for Angelica. So I'm drawn to overplanting Angelica in this patch, so anything that I can slip in between just to bring in different life forms, different bugs, to prevent any buildup of disease. And these yin-yang beans, yin-yang bush beans, have that yin-yang pattern going on. make great storable beans. So this is just something that's happening in between one of my favorite plants, and will actually fill a whole jar of beautiful organic beans I can then rehydrate in the winter and eat the nutrition and goodness from my own garden. So in we go again, cover it up. I should have actually done this before I watered everything in. The soil's so sticky and hard to work with now. But yeah, I'll just put these beans in everywhere. So those yin-yang bush beans will come and go while everything else does its thing. And when they're bigger, that's when the mulch will be going around them as well. So nice bare soil for them to come up in. If you ever open a patch like this in spring when it warms up, it is a good chance to put seeds straight in the soil. Seeds that wouldn't usually break through the mulch. But the potatoes, like I said in one of my first videos, are quite happy to break through that mulch. So they've all come up. And if you have a ridiculous amount of slugs raiding your garden every night like I do, I've learnt that they come for these baby leaves. They can smell them a mile away. Slugs and snails know exactly what they're doing. Get them away from the garden, because I know they're good for the plant to grow, but in my situation, they'll end up calling for the plant's death. So I remove these juicy, I suppose you could eat them. They're probably the best part of the plant, full of nutrients, soft and tender. Now I plant all my fruit pips, they're apricot seedlings, in the side of my larger pots. So I plant all these in spring and summer, and then they pop up next spring. So I have all these baby fruit trees growing in these pots. Peaches, nectarines, all this stone fruit, plums. And it can be a little bit dicey moving these onto a pot. Straight into the ground seems to have a better result. When you're moving a plant into a smaller situation, most plants don't like it and they can feel it, so you want to do it as least stressful for the plant as possible. And if you're wondering why these palms look so unhealthy, it's because that branch fell off the tree, the big bushy bit, right onto all of them. But turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because there was a random frost and it protected the fruit seedlings from the frost. Now the reason I'm showing you this transplanting is because it covers a few points that could be taken and used for different kinds of seedling planting. So take from this what you will. Now there is no need to buy new plastic for your garden. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of everything. There's more than enough milk bottles lying around in bins around the world, millions polluting the ocean. Even though this doesn't take care of that problem, they're there and they can be used, and we shouldn't be paying for companies to make these plastic pots. And every plastic pot I've got is recycled, got from the tip, people give them to me. I've gone through hundreds of plastic pots and I've never paid for one. This one's broken, so I'm just gonna fill the bottom with soil, like so. And I'm gonna use a knife, have a good sharp garden knife, and I'm gonna cut a square around here, because we're dealing with the entanglement of roots of different plants, so we're gonna cause damage no matter what we do. Let's be clean and surgical about it. I'm gonna cut a square. The other side. One-handed gardening show. Get the knife underneath like a shovel. Give it a bit of a lift. Now I have to put the camera down, because I don't want to mess this up for the sake of the video. So we've got the pot ready. Always have the next pot ready with a delicate transplant situation. Have the bottom of the pot already full. You don't want to be holding this root ball and filling a pot at the same time. And the trick is to get it out as undamaged as possible. Once you've lifted it, slip your hand underneath to cut off the bottom, curl your hand under, lift it out the ground. You can gauge what depth we'll need in the pot. Remove a bit of this. Now, a little bit there. Slip it in as gently as possible, trying to keep that root ball intact. Look how cool it is. You can see the pit that it grew out of. Now I'm going to gently push it in a bit. I don't want to... I've disturbed a fair bit. I can usually do this better. Now I'll just keep it nice and straight while I sprinkle the new soil in, gently pushing down. And a transplant like this, where it's a more delicate plant, it's entangled with other roots, it's been cut out, it's best to leave this in the shade for at least 3 days. This will flop, and the faster, it'll flop over soon, and the faster it comes back up, that will let you know how rough the move was. And I wouldn't put it back in the sun until it's up again. So I'll water this in, it'll flop over, I'll put it in the shade. Once it comes back up, that's when I put it in the sun. And I'll just pop you with your brothers and sisters. So it's quite interesting to see all the amount of stone fruit I eat per year. And then how cool is it that each seed, which is usually viewed as rubbish, is now potentially going on to provide enough, more than enough fruit for a whole big family. Each little one of these trees has that potential, and we throw it in the bin all around the world millions of times a day. And then we go and buy tasteless, poisoned versions of it in the supermarket. But an interesting note, these fruit seedlings, I picked these all from fruit trees in the valley, in the Kiwa Valley where I live, and I monitored when they fruited. And this is a mixture of peaches that fruit from late spring to late autumn. So this should provide peaches for 6 months straight. When the earlier fruiting varieties start to finish, the middle varieties will start. When they finish, the late autumn varieties will start. So this is 6 months supply of peaches for hundreds of people right here. And if your seedling isn't standing straight, just gonna pop a little rock, just a little stone there for a few weeks while the roots strengthen up and it reestablishes its position. Now, if any seedlings flop over in the soggy soil after planting, again, just use a little stone to prop them up, because that touching the ground creates a ramp straight to the center of the plant for slugs to devour, and it kills the plant. I've just learnt from personal experience. And would you look who's come out? Ugh, slugs, I hate them because the slime just sticks to your skin. And water cuttings are the happiest to be planted on They're just glad to be out of that sticky situation. So again, we just, like an envelope, make an opening. Look at that. Now, if the roots are really long, you can twirl them in to get them in without damaging them. I'm holding the camera, so I'll lay it to the side. Fold the soil back over the roots. Now there's no root damage there at all. Cuttings can be just as delicate as little seedlings, but they are just, if they come from water, they're just so happy to be in soil, you're bound to get a fast, positive result. This variegated Chinese lantern. We've got some tulsi seeds here. Now these are really easy, you just gently pull them from the stem. And these tulsi seeds, let's zoom in, you can then just sprinkle on the tops of your other pot plants. And basil loves growing like this. I get better results growing basil like this than I usually do in my little seedling trays, though I'm doing really good this year. Another fresh patch for Inca berries. You can see the Inca berry here, which will eventually take over this whole patch. But instead of weeds, I've got rocket. Now I could have mulched, but I want the rocket. And it's a bare patch, good for seedlings. I'll mulch over it eventually. Right now, it is my rocket mulch fantasy. And back over to the finger squash. I just wanted to say another little tip. So the sun stays longer on this section of the garden than it does on this section of the garden. As you can see, I've planted the bigger ones, the stronger looking ones, in the area that gets the least sun, and I've planted the smaller ones in the area that gets the most sun. The reason I've done this is to even out the growth so they don't overtake each other. These will take a little longer to get started over here because there's not enough sun, and these will start even faster because they're getting more sun, and that'll even out the growth. By the time they're teenagers, they'll all be the same size, and the sun will have moved a bit in the sky, and this whole area will get more light, and they'll all be teenagers and they'll grow all at the same height together. And a small one like this won't get choked out in the mix. So I plant the smaller ones up front and the bigger ones at the back. Up front meaning where the light hits first and more. Well, not so much first, where the light hits more. The garden right now, I'm like the sun. This is the way the sun comes in. And the bigger ones are further back in this stacking system because they've got more height. They won't get shadowed out, and they'll all grow happily together. What am I gonna do with all these? I'll give them away for free if anyone wants to come and get them. You can always use that cup trick to water in a seedling. One hand. Ooh. Let's see if we can do this. And that just protects the soil as you're pouring the first lot of water on because the soil's so loose. And that's about it for the spring planting video. There's so many aspects to this because there's so many different kinds of plants.